Sister Pat, we can begin. It's already 3-2. Sister.
Okay. Students, we can begin.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. I am Anushri and I am your host for today. I wholeheartedly welcome everyone present here. Thank you for choosing to be part of this discussion. I would request Rija ma'am to deliver her thoughts.
Thank you, Anushri. As a coordinator for the DBT, and this is being sponsored under DBT Star College, Star Status. Sophia College received the Star Status grant in 2015, and now we are one among the 6 colleges in Maharashtra who got a Star Status grant. So we have been upgraded to Star Status, and with their generous funding, the DBT's generous funding, we have been able to organize many programs of this kind. So we're very grateful to the Star DBT for funding, and also we are very grateful to all those who are attending here and all the dignitaries who are present here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shirisha.
Thank you, ma'am. Today we have an amazing panel on the chemistry of mood, where we will learn more about few common brain chemicals and how they impact the way you're thinking and mood. Mood can be very hard to predict. It seems like a product of life circumstances and events, but mood and mood stressors are much more complex. Stressor spark an emotional response in the body with the help of neurotransmitters and hormones. So, brain chemistry is just as responsible for your emotions and types of mood as any life event. So, on behalf of Sophia College of Women, I warmly welcome our speakers for today and extend greetings to all of you present. Welcoming our esteemed panelists for today's discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our first speaker for today is Dr. Avinash D'Souza. Dr. Avinash D'Souza is a consultant psychiatrist and president of the Bombay Psychiatric Society. He's also the editor of a journal called Indian Journal of Mental Health, along with having over 300 publications in national as well as international journals. He's one of the few psychiatrists who, in addition to a psychiatry degree, has an MBA in human resource development, a master's in psychotherapy and counseling, and an MPhil in psychology.
We welcome you, sir. Moving on to our next panelist.
Good afternoon, everybody. Our second speaker for today, Dr. Ratnaraja Krishnatha, is a nutritionist having more than 30 years of experience under her belt and has undertaken nutrition and health programs in tribal, rural, and urban areas. She's also a course creator and an academic advisor, as well as a visiting member for Sophia's Women's Center. She is an honorable police nutritionist for the Maharashtra Police and Police Hospital, Nagpada. Dr. Ratnaraja Krishnatha comes from a strong academic background and holds a PhD in Biological Sciences, PG Diploma in Education and Management, BSc, MSc, and MPhil in Foods and Nutrition. With these words, we welcome you, Doctor. On to you, Ishani.
Good afternoon, all. Last but not the least, I would like to welcome Ms. Samindara Sawan, who is a clinical psychologist, regression therapist, transformational growth therapist, RECBT practitioner, and an author. She specializes in psychodiagnostics and clinical assessments and has considerable experience in child, adolescent, marriage, as well as family psychotherapy. Ms. Samindara is currently the director of Disha Counseling Center, resource room head at Bhakti Vedanta Swami Mission School, and senior clinical psychologist at Psychometrica.
Thank you all for such an amazing introduction of each and every speaker. We are honored to have these speakers with us for today's panel discussion. Before we actually dive into the topic, I would like to ask our panelists their journey into the field of psychology. Can you tell us briefly what is the most intriguing part of the field that you work in? So,
Okay, I thought you'd want to start with the ladies first, but that's fine. I'll answer. Yeah. Well, the thing is that for me, I think, I was born into a family of psychiatrists. Both my parents were psychiatrists. So I guess, I just grew up hearing so much about psychology and psychiatry right from an early age that I took up medicine. And I think post-medicine, I really had no option but to take up psychiatry because that was what I wanted to do. No, but not that. It was my personal interest that made me go there. And I'm one of the few psychiatrists who also has a psychology degree. So psychology also interested me because I think the two fields are interlinked, and there's no medication therapy alone that works. It's always counseling, medication, a combination of therapies. And I think you have to know psychology to be a good psychiatrist. So yeah, that's my journey.
that's very interesting. Dr. Saminder.
Well, for me, I stumbled into psychology, as I like to say. When I stepped into humanities after my high school, my passion was always books and writing. And that is what I had decided way early in life, that I'm going to make a career in English. But psychology was one of the minors that I had taken in my junior college and undergraduate years. And as part of our program, I was blessed to be in a college which had a very, very strong psychology department. And we had a field visit to the Thane Mental Hospital in my undergraduate years. And that became a life-changing event for me. It left a very deep impact on my mind. And I decided that I wanted to do something in this field where I could reach out and help to people who were struggling with mental health issues and challenges. And that is when, in my first year of BA, I changed the direction from English to psychology. And since then, there has been no looking back and no regrets.
Wow, it's really interesting to know a story which most of the students are facing of changing the field. Welcome, ma'am, once again.
Thank you.
Dr. Samit, Dr. Rajan,
Ratna.
Ratna Rajan.
I was muted, sorry. My internet is, sorry for the little unstable, so I had to shift internet devices. What do I say about my career in nutrition? Actually, it started with Sophia College. Way back in 1982, when I left school Villa Trisa and I entered into Sophia College. And I took up, I don't know whether you all still have it. I don't think so you'll have it. I took up arts vocational, where we had a subject called food preservation. There was banking and office management, I remember, in those days, but I was interested in cooking, and cooking led me to change streams. After arts vocational, I switched into BSc, home science, that is Nirmala Niketan, after 12th, and then there was no looking back. So here I am after passing out a couple of degrees, and I have spent about a little over 30 years in this field of nutrition.
It's such a good thing to hear. And I'm sure many of the students right now present have similar motivation and inspiration to pursue a career in psychology. So now, without making our audience wait any longer, we'll begin with a discussion of today's topic, the chemistry of. Now, I asked Dr. Avinash D'Souza to start with the discussion.
Well, the topic itself is very intriguing for the very simple reason that when you look at the mind or the brain, while we say it's a biological structure, it's also a chemical structure. In fact, your brain is made up of a lot of chemicals. We all talk about some commonly known names like serotonin and dopamine and noradrenaline, and we know that yes, these are chemicals which are there. But what many people don't know is that the brain probably has around 500 odd different chemicals that function as neurotransmitters, and we're not even aware of some of them and their actual functions. There are some which haven't been discovered yet. There are some which have been discovered, but we don't know much about them. And every thought you have is biological. For example, I tell you, think about something and your brain fires, and you think about something that's happening because of a chemical reaction in your brain. To make it very simple, you have some chemicals that make you happier, you have some chemicals that make you sadder, you have some chemicals that make you angrier, you have some chemicals that make you feel lost and disgusted, you have some chemicals that make you feel upset, there are some chemicals that make you feel very low. So this all depends on the levels of these chemicals in our brain. Sadly, we don't have any blood tests to tell us, where you can go and check and tell that, okay, today I'm low in this, so this is going to happen. Because these are brain-based chemicals. They are not chemicals which are in your brain, in your blood, that, will give you an idea. They are chemicals which are released within your brain. So there's no way where we can probably determine these levels very accurately. But what's also important to understand is things around us affect our chemicals. So for example, if we tell you that there's not going to be any final exams and all of you are going to get your degrees without an exam, it would probably raise some happier chemicals in the brains of a lot of people. But if at the same time you come to know of the death of a very close friend today, it would probably raise the levels of chemicals that make you sadder. Now, the whole thing is, the brain is a structure that is very plastic. It changes from time to time. So every time you do something new, your brain changes. Every time you learn a new language, your brain changes. Every time you get into a new activity, your brain changes. In fact, since you all are a large number of ladies and young women who are attending today's lecture, you all undergo a phenomenon which I think none of the men undergo, and that is the menstrual cycle. And what happens is there are male hormones and there are female hormones. So testosterone, which is the male hormone, has different effects on the brain, and estrogen and progesterone has different effects on the brain. Testosterone is a very social, aloofing hormone. So you find many men are quiet and reserved and they don't like to talk much. Whereas estrogen is a more socializing hormone. Progesterone is a more socially aloofing hormone. So in the first half of the monthly cycle, the first 15 days, you're high on estrogen. And very often mood-wise, I'm talking the moment you finish bleeding and the menstrual cycle ends. The next 15 days is always a good period because you are high on estrogen. And estrogen is also a chemical which is present in your brain. Always remember, all our reproductive hormones are also there in our brain. It's not just that they are reproductive in function, they also affect our mood. So estrogen makes you feel positive. And suddenly you will find a small shift in your mood after 15 days of the menstrual cycle. And that's when your progesterone levels start rising, and they keep rising till the onset of your monthly cycle. So the 1 week or 5 days prior to your menstrual cycle is a little troublesome. You get a little angry, you get irritable, you get upset. I'm not saying it's the premenstrual syndrome. It's very normal for that to happen because that happens because of the progesterone levels being high. Now, why this is very important for you to know is because research has shown that the female brain probably changes every week based on your hormones. The chemical structure, I'm not saying the brain structure changes, the brain is the same, but the chemical structure changes based on the hormonal fluctuations. Now, the same happens when you hit puberty at around 13 or 14 or 12 or 11. The same happens when you reach menopause post 40. So, you have these hormonal changes that influence the way you feel, the way you think. At the same time, a very important factor that determines your life and determines how your brain works is your life events. So for example, if you're in a very unhappy family and you're in a family where there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of bickering, so every day you're releasing these sad chemicals, which are going to affect your brain. But if you're in a family that is otherwise socially very supportive, even though you have other problems in your life, you keep releasing positive chemicals. So you feel good and you feel okay. The bottom line is you have to stay with people who make you feel positive. You have to stay with people where you can be your own. You have to stay with people where you will not be judged. You have to stay with people who induce positivity in you, because that's good. for your brain. If you're going to be with people who always pull you down and make you feel negative, it's going to probably affect your brain in a negative way. Another very important facet is that you determine the chemistry of your brain. The way you think, what you do, influences the chemistry of your brain. I'll give you a very simple example. You are all young adults, and you'll all probably will experience romantic relationships. You'll all probably experience breakups in a romantic relationship. You'll all probably experience loss from an emotional point of view. Now, when you have a breakup in a romantic relationship, the reason I'm giving this example is because many of you may be able to identify with it. You will have a plethora of negative chemicals that release into your brain. Suddenly, the person who you will feel positive about, the guy or the girl whoever the person was in a relationship with, you feel positive about, you suddenly start thinking negative about that person. Probably it wasn't worth it. Probably it wasn't good. Probably it was good that this breakup happened. Why? One, psychologically, that's your rationalization. But chemically, you're also releasing chemicals that make you feel negative because of what happened to you. And that's what causes this. But at the same time, when you were in a good, healthy relationship with that person, you always felt positive. Why? Because it's your mindset and how you think at that point of time that very often influences the release of chemicals in your brain. Now, when you're low, unless you have a large amount of positivity that happens in your life, nothing interests you. And when you're very positive, some amount of negativity you learn to let go of and not bother about. So that is how our mind works. What's also very important to understand, even your ability to face pain. When I'm talking about pain here, I mean A, physical pain, B, emotional pain. Now, physical pain, some of you can face a lot of physical pain. So if you look at boxers, you look at fighters, they endure a lot of physical pain and they're fine. Why? Because their brain releases a chemical called opioids, which allows them to face this pain. Opioids are the same substances that are there in some painkillers, and they allow you to face a lot of pain. But emotional pain releases the emotional chemicals. So very often when you've undergone trauma once or twice or thrice, and this is very common in people who have been in relationships where for a long time they have faced some trauma and abuse, they very often come to you and tell you, nowadays I don't feel any emotions. I become numb. If anyone says anything, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't cry. I don't laugh. I'm just numb. The reason is you have acclimatized yourself not to react, because you don't release those chemicals anymore that make you react, because you think this is routine. And that is what affects your mind. We have, of course, with us 2 other speakers. We have a nutritionist who will talk about nutrition. We have someone else. And definitely nutrition also affects the chemicals we produce in our brain. I totally agree with that. Your life events affect the chemicals that your brain produces. But what's very, very important, remember, and this is my message to you all today. Of course, we'll have a panel also. I'm not signing off, but the message is things will go bad. There will be bad days. You will release these negative chemicals. You will feel all alone. You will feel lonely. You may be at an age where you feel nothing is working out. It's all hopeless. But remember, life goes on. Okay, we keep releasing our chemicals. It's fine. It's not about waiting for the storm to pass. We got to learn to dance in the rain. That's what's very important. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful, informative talk, and for the last affirmation that most of the people right now at this age require. We now have the floor open for any questions from audience. You may raise your hand or may type the question in the chat. Go ahead, Krishna.
Okay, so this is regarding the age and the chemical in the brain. So let's say that I have a breakup at the age of 16, and then I have a breakup at the age of 30. So will there be any variation in the release of the chemical in the brains, or will it be like almost similar?
Okay, Now, this depends on a lot of factors. Okay. Now, always remember, the first time you fall in love, the first time you have a breakup, it's always worse because it's happening to you for the first time. You've not had that experience before. So the first love also is intense. The first breakup is also intense, invariably. Now, at the age of 30, life has also changed you. You know, you've seen a lot of things happen. You become I won't use the word, not that you are immature, but you become mature because of life. And what happens is that, you learn to take things in your stride. At 16, when someone leaves you, you begin to feel, oh, my world has fallen apart and I'm never going to recover from this. And, it's the end of the world. But at 30, when it happens, you realize, yes, I know people don't stay, people do go. I have to accept it. And, you may even talk to that person regularly as a friend at 30, understanding that the relationship can't go forward. But at 16, you may not talk to that person at all. You all may never probably meet again in life. There are a lot of things that happen. But that's because at that stage, it's not about the chemicals you release. The chemicals released are the same, but the intensity and fervor with which they are released are different based on your life experiences and how you mature. And if the same thing happens to you at, say, the age of 40, you just realize there's no use fighting. Let me be quiet. It's absolutely fine. I'll give you a very simpler example. Let's say you're 17 and you're driving a car and someone overtakes you. So you'll tell him, "Aao, bahar niklo, come on, let's fight," that way. But when you're 40 and you're driving a car and someone overtakes you, you feel like, let him go. Why is he in a hurry? You think, that way. So that's how life changes you, and then automatically you realize, okay, yes, let me release chemicals only when I have to. Why should I, just keep bombarding my brain? So that's what happens.
Thank you so much, sir.
There is a question in the. Thank you so much, Krishna, for asking that question. There is another question in the chat box. Rochelle says, you said that testosterone is linked to being aloof. Does it mean that men who are highly social have lower levels of testosterone?
No, it doesn't mean that men who are highly social have lower levels of testosterone. What it primarily means is that testosterone as a hormone is the reason why men speak less. For example, men who lecturing and talking is very different. For example, meeting people socially for business is very different. But when you're with a loved one, you speak less if your testosterone levels are high. But it's not about the fact that high testosterone may cause you to get very aloof or low testosterone may cause you to talk more. That would depend on your personality characteristics. But generally, men prefer to be alone. They're happier alone. They don't mind. They can spend the whole day alone. They say, whereas it's women who generally want people around. And that difference is due to the testosterone estrogen difference.
Thank you so much, sir. We will take next questions by the end of the discussion. Moving on with the agenda. Anushri, I pass it on.
Thank you, sir, for actually clarifying such a doubt. I would now request Dr. Ratnaraj Dhar to take on the floor and carry on with the discussion.
Thank you so much. Am I audible to everybody? Thank you. I'd like to first give a few introductory remarks from where Dr. Avinash, he presented to you all. He spoke about menstrual cycle. He spoke about, the highs and lows that you feel before and after. And, depends, I'm not talking of premenstrual syndrome alone. It's basically the highs and lows that you feel in life as you go through college, through your social life, through the relationships, through your relatives. And this is what I have observed. And you probably ask everybody around you, what is your favorite food? What is it that you love to eat? Somebody may say, I feel when I'm low and, somebody offers me a chocolate. That's how the chocolate industry is really thriving on. That you eat this chocolate bar and you become sensible, or you're growling too much, you eat a chocolate bar and you become sane. There are a lot of ads there in the market. So what exactly are they targeting? They are targeting the normal up and down of our mind, of our brain. And on certain days we feel that we are the top of the world, probably sitting on Mount Everest, and on some days we feel we are in a bottomless pit, and we are thinking how much low are we going to actually fall, because I can't see the end of the pit. So that's when people tend to look for food as a best friend. And there are many people, I have seen this personally, since you all are students of Sophia College. Next time you all observe it. Next to you all is a place called Breach Candy. And you'll find these ladies in the afternoon shopping at the Breach Candy shops over there. And there's a little place where eatery you can eat. Then you'll find ladies in the heat of the afternoon, probably it's not lunchtime nor it is a tea time, they will be eating these burgers and mega sandwiches and bhel puri, safe puri, and all this combos of whatever food that probably, and that at the same time, and they're hungrily eating it. Okay, it's not that they're eating it because they have nothing else to do. They are hungrily eating it. And then you'll find a few beggars standing away from them and looking at them eat. So then it makes you wonder, who is actually hungry? Are these ladies hungry or the beggars hungry? And then you wonder why, what is it that is making them eat at odd times? And they're very happy about it. It's not that they are, sad that to stand and eat, or they're very happily enjoying themselves, chatting away and talking, and in fact sometimes excessively talking. You wonder who's listening to who, because everybody is talking at the same time, but they are all munching away and eating away and promoting each other, have this, have that, eat this, eat that. Sometimes I used to stand at that bus stop over there. There's a bus stop called it used to be the Bridge Candy bus stop, or I used to catch my bus from there, and I used to keep on observing. After college, I said, why do these guys eat so much? I mean, is it that they don't get food at home to eat, or what is it? What is it that is making them eat? And this is when I realized, when I was studying nutrition, that there is this concept called comfort foods, which people go to. So you'll have the chocolate industry, you'll have the biscuit industry, you'll have the soup industry, choti book industry, you'll have the noodle industry, you'll have the potato wafer industry. In fact, next time, if any one of you all travel by train, we all will notice the shop which sells these chikkis and little farsan and things like that, very strategically placed. I used to wonder why it is placed near the ladies compartment only. Why shouldn't it be placed away from it? Because I used to find any lady for 4 rupees, 5 rupees maximum. I mean, now I don't know by train. Last 2 years I haven't traveled, but before that I was a very regular traveler by train, and I used to see these 3 rupee chikkis and 4 rupees. And in fact, you see the ladies compartment also, what are they selling? Besides the clips and the bands and all those things, is food. They are selling food. And they are selling this chakna, they call it chakna in Bombay language, which is like time pass or chakna. Anything, you're not hungry, you're just eating. And that kind of eating has got an impact on your hormonal level. And which hormone is the one that is really being pulled up and pulled down, and I find hunger pangs and coming on? It's a hormone called insulin. And very often, I was a youngster and I used to travel by train, and we used to have the fourth seat really comfortable to sit on. Now if you see the fourth seat, you can't sit on it. Not even one leg fits on it, because the expanse of the ladies who are sitting in the first 3 seats is so much that there is no place for the fourth seat. So it tells you that what is wrong? What is this obesity and constant eat? Is it something to do with our mindset? Is it something to do with stress? Is it something to do with our day-to-day challenges that we feel? So this is what I want to start my discussion with. Thank you. Over to the next speaker, Dr. Sawant.
Thank you, ma'am, for actually giving us such an example which we relate for a day-to-day life. Before we actually move to the next speaker, the floor is again for a few minutes open for any question that have. The rules are same. You may raise the hand or type it in the chat. You may go ahead.
Hi, ma'am. I actually had a question that you just spoke about some foods that can make us feel happy, for example, chocolates or sweets or things like that. So, are there also, on the other hand, foods that are more likely to make us more irritable, more aggressive, more cranky? And like if you eat those foods at certain times of the day, they might make you feel different ways. Is there like any relationship between negative emotions and food also?
Actually, the very same foods that you eat as comfort foods can switch gear, and they are the same ones that can cause acidity to you. So that's the time when you are probably going to get the negative emotions, because your problem has not gone away. You have not really solved your problem. You've just tried to comfort yourself, and your problem still exists. Your body, you have stuffed it with something that it really doesn't need. So by having these comfort foods in excess, okay, I always say in excess because nobody eats a little bit, like a little small piece. They always tend to, they are unstoppable in eating. If you go to see, if they take a sweet dish in their hand, yeah, they may not be hungry, but just to finish it, because they have to do something, mentally keep themselves occupied, they will keep on eating. And as a result, sometimes there's a guilty feeling and negative emotion. Sometimes the food itself causes a stomach upset because it's not able to get digested. So I think that could be the reason, because uh, I mean, in India, we are very happy when guests come to a house. Now, next time, notice it. When guest comes to a house, it is an insult to the host that if he offers you something and you don't take a little bit. So even if you're not hungry, even if you're not thirsty, you will force yourself to eat something just because the guest has offered it to you. Try this out during the festival periods when you are visiting from one relative's house to the other. First relatives, you enjoy all his food. The next relative, you may eat a little. Third, you say, no, don't even show it to me. That means you are insulting the host. He has prepared everything and kept for you to eat. And we have got this Indian habit of, I'll say it in Marathi, I don't know any other word for it. We call it agraha. Ek aur. Why not? What is there? Diet tomorrow. Take it. No, we do this agraha system. We don't let the person be. If he's saying no, means no. We feel he's purposely saying no because he's feeling shy. No, no, no means no. Don't offer. So sometimes this excessive eating after coming out from a thali joint, I've seen so many people, अरे 400 रुपया दिया है ना, तो 400 रुपया लेने का चाहिए पूरा they will eat, and by the time they're walking out, they're actually probably crawling out. I won't say they're walking out. They are so burdened with the food that they've eaten. Why? Because for 400 rupees. So I don't know whether it's a positive. I can't make out. I guess the psychologist and psychiatrist can answer. Why do we tend next time go to a wedding? I'll give you another example. You go to a wedding. Array, people from good families, they feel the food is going to run away. They will go from stall to stall stuffing their plates. They feel that they have never eaten this in their lives, or they have either come from some famine or drought or whatever portion. They're just gorging, and sometimes you look at them and you wonder, God, you really have capacity, man. And they're very proud of it. And the host is also very happy. Dekho, itna acha kaya. I'm like, itna acha kaya. I'm carrying that load home. So I don't know. I mean, whether it is inbuilt into our psychology system of our mind, how we are brought up, and mothers tell their children,
I think ma'am lost
Yeah,
connection.
ma'am is changed. I guess by the time ma'am rejoins session. The questions that are, we will now move on to the next speaker, and the remaining questions will be taken at the end of the session. With these, I ask Samindara ma'am to actually take on the floor and continue this amazing discussion that we are all enjoying so much.
Thank you, Anushri. And not just all of you, but sitting here listening to Dr. Avinash and Dr. Ratnaraje, I'm also enjoying so much and learning so much. What I'm going to try and do in the little time that I have is to basically we saw how the brains impact our emotions and how emotions are essentially hardwired or softwired into our brain and our neurochemistry, and how food and what we eat or how we eat impacts our moods. So what I will try and focus on is how do we take all this information, put it all together and use it for our advantage. So as we've seen, emotions are our very own, I would say, neurochemical navigation systems. They are fundamental building blocks of what makes us humans, what enables us to connect to what's happening inside us, around us, and to other human beings around us. Right? So they have been the universal language of communication long before language ever came. And even in the structure of the brain, we know that emotions are embedded into the very, very deeper parts of our brain, like the limbic system and the hippocampus, which came long before the more developed parts of the human brain evolved. So each and every emotion has been hardwired into our brain through the process of evolution and exists for a purpose. No matter how unpleasant, how uncomfortable, or how unwelcome an emotion may be, what we need to understand is that it exists for a reason. So what we try to do is look at emotions as a source of information. They are, like I said, a navigation system. They are our radar. They are what help us understand what's happening inside us and outside of us. So if we are able to tune into our emotions, if we are able to listen to them, we can get very valuable information, which may not always come only through thought and logic. So our emotions tell us what's going on in our inner landscape, and they give us information about what gives us joy and happiness, what makes us unhappy, what makes us angry. Emotions also help us to focus our attention on things that are important. They are the first filter that we use so that we can prioritize what to focus on, what to react to. So basically things that grab our attention, and usually things that grab our attention are the ones that we react very intensely to emotionally, either with intense happiness and joy, or with anger, or with sadness, or with envy. So they tell us what is it that's going on that's important to us. So if we are able to use this information and use this to, in combination with our thoughts, in combination with our reason, if we learn to reason using emotions as our friends, it actually makes so much sense. Because our emotions can be vivid, they can be intense, we can use them very, very efficiently to guide our attention on matters that are really, really important to us. But how do we do this? There are many ways in which we can do this, and the first thing to do is to understand what our relationship with our emotions is. So I'm going to ask a series of, in a very slow manner, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. You all don't need to answer, but you all just need to think for a second about that question and see if you can come up with an answer to that. So what is your relationship with your emotions like? Do you experience emotions that flow, encountering one emotion after another as experiences change from moment to moment? Are your emotions accompanied by physical sensations that you may experience in maybe your stomach or your chest or your head? Do you experience discrete feelings and emotions like anger, sadness, fear, or do you feel your emotions flowing into one into the other? Can you experience intense feelings that are strong enough to capture both your attention as well as that of others? Or do you experience emotions that just flit and flow before you can understand what they are? Most important, do you pay attention to your emotions? Do they factor in your decision making? So these are just some thoughts to get you thinking about the complexity of emotions, because it is the complexity and the confusion that sometimes emotions can bring, because there can be contradictory emotions, there can be confusing emotions, there can be emotions we are not able to really label, that make us shy away from them. We feel threatened, or we feel scared, we feel upset. And of course, there are so many myths around emotions, right? So many things that are just not true. Things like emotions make you weak, emotions are inferior to logic. There are so many myths around emotion. So, if we are able to slowly disentangle that mess of emotions, or the ideas around emotions that we have grown up with, we will be able to use all this information in a much coherent manner. So the way towards this is by building emotional intelligence, agility, and emotional literacy. I'm sure all of you have heard and read a lot about emotional intelligence, so I'm not going to spend time talking about that, but I do want to share a little bit about what emotional literacy and emotional agility is all about. So let us understand what emotional literacy is. It's in simple words, it is to learn to read and understand our emotions better. As we all know, literacy is all about reading, writing, understanding, right? So emotional literacy is about reading our emotions better, understanding them better, and utilizing them better. Simple things that we can do so that we learn to become more aware of our emotions. We've seen how emotions are connected to the brain and the body. So learn to recognize what signals your body gives you for a specific emotion. How does your body tell you that you're angry or happy or afraid? Learn to label emotions accurately. Many times we say things like, I'm feeling so bad. Bad is not an emotion. I'm feeling so good. Good is not an emotion. When you say I'm feeling good, are you feeling happy? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling enthusiastic? Are you feeling joyous? What emotion are you feeling? Try to label them accurately and precisely rather than using generic terms like good or bad. Stay open to pleasant as well as unpleasant emotions. Like I said, no matter how unpleasant an emotion, there is a purpose that it comes up in your space. And build capacity for experiencing and recognizing multiple and complex emotions. So many times doesn't it happen? When you see your best friend having done so well in the exams, you feel so happy and proud for her, but you also feel a pang and you feel that sadness, oh, I wish it was me. Happens to the best of us. We experience conflicting emotions and we have to acknowledge them and accept them and own them. Right? So if we understand how emotions show up in our body, it helps us to get a better idea, a better understanding of what's happening in our inner landscape. That's what emotional literacy is all about. A little bit about emotional agility. Emotional agility is a beautiful concept that a psychologist called Susan David has come up with, and she says that it's nothing but a process that helps us to navigate through the twists and turns that life throws up with self-acceptance, clear-sightedness, and an open mind. As Dr. Avinash said when he spoke, that bad things will happen. No matter how much we plan our lives, there are going to be things that happen that set us back emotionally. But if we are able to accept what's happening inside of us, we are able to be compassionate towards ourselves, and we are able to keep an open mind, we are able to move through that experience a lot more easily. It's not about not experiencing emotions, but the focus is about not getting stuck in certain emotions, but to experience them and move along. It's not about ignoring difficult emotions, it's about holding these emotions loosely, facing them courageously and compassionately, and then moving past them to ignite positive changes in your life. To conclude, I'll just say that we need to face our emotions with honesty. Sometimes step away from them, use mindfulness, study them dispassionately, and allow our own inner value system to help us decide how best to deal with them. With that, I will stop and check if any of you have any questions.
It was really nice hearing about how to regulate emotions, literacy, and many terms which I personally was not aware of. Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us. I guess Akansha has a question. Akansha, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I have a question which is a little bit personal. but I think you are the person who could answer that. Since whenever I am in too much pressure, when I have a lot of things going on, it is difficult to pick one emotion at that time. It is difficult to identify which emotion is dominant than the other. But one thing that I go through is that I do not pay attention to what I'm feeling, but I just keep doing things that I want to do. And the moment I start realizing that this is overwhelming, it is difficult for me to complete the tasks that I'm handed over. So, what should I do in these situations?
Okay, so like I said, Akanksha, the first step would be, it would be helpful for you to try and identify what emotion you are experiencing. And yes, it can be overwhelming at times, which is why we try to focus on action. We use various distraction techniques to not experience that emotion. But you can try and do two things. You can, whatever, there are too many thoughts that happen or come into our mind when we are overwhelmed. So one thing you can ask yourself is, what is the one thing that's bothering me right now? If you can get yourself to ask that question and wait for the answer to come up, it will give you a lot of clarity. Is it that I'm afraid I'm not well prepared? That brings up fear and anxiety. Is it that I'm worried that I'll not do as well as some of my friends? That may be a little bit, maybe I'm the embarrassment is what I'm experiencing. So if you are able to identify the one thing, it will help you get closer to the emotion. The other very easy and simple way is to connect to your body. Like I said, when you are afraid, your body will show up certain signs. All of us experience butterflies in our stomach, or that, that feeling in the pit of our stomach, we feel that dread. Or some of us experience sweaty palms. Or if we are very excited, we feel, that we are literally jumping with energy and joy. So each of us has certain specific ways in which our body tells us what emotion we are feeling. So if the thoughts or the feelings are too overwhelming, just connect to what's happening in your body and just observe. A little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of breath work, if you are able to do, just observe your breath and observe what's happening in your body. That will A, help you to calm down, and B, maybe help you to get closer to what exact emotion you are experiencing. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I guess for the Erica, if that's how you pronounce the name, go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, ma'am. First of all, I would just like to thank you for the talk.
Can you be a bit louder, Erica?
Yes. Am I audible now?
Barely.
You're still very soft. If you want, you can type it in the chat box and we'll read it out to you.
Yeah, I think I'll do that.
Oh, that would be right. There are many questions in the chat box. Akanksha, you want to take any one of them, please?
Yes. So Emanuela has a question. Apart from stomach aches, sweaty palms, increased heart rate, what are few other physical indications of different emotions?
So there are some common or universal ways in which our bodies react, and yet every one of us will also have specific ways in which we react, but typically racing heartbeat, sweaty palms, uncomfortable sensations in our stomach, sometimes feeling dizzy, right? Or you feel a tightness or a rigidness in your body, flushing of face when you're angry. These are some very common universal ways in which the body responds to emotions. At the same time, some of us have certain specific vulnerabilities. So many of us, when stressed, experience stomach upsets, we have gastrointestinal problems. Many of us experience headaches or migraines. Some of us may start feeling dizzy when we are experiencing an uncomfortable emotion. So we have individual vulnerabilities, but what I just mentioned initially are some of the common ways in which the body shows us something is happening at the emotional level.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we will take Ridhi's question, and the rest of the questions will be taken by the end of all the discussions. Ridhi, go ahead. Okay, moving ahead.
Yeah, I guess she logged down. With these, Before that, Erica, the girl that was trying to speak, she has a question. I'll quickly take it up. We have techniques like breath work. So when we experience an overwhelming amount of emotion, would you recommend letting a person feel the emotion completely, or do these techniques to help them to self-regulate?
So both EFT and breathwork are techniques that help you to experience the emotion but in a self-regulated and comfortable manner. So these will help you to identify, acknowledge and release these emotions without A, getting overwhelmed, and B, without needing to suppress those emotions. So any of these modalities like EFT, breathwork, there are some other techniques as well, or any simple grounding exercises that you do will help you to be able to release those emotions, experience them without getting overwhelmed by them. So yes, you can use these techniques to whenever you feel too much emotion coming up.
Thank you, ma'am. That surely answers this question as she has posted. Thank you too. I guess we can have more questions right now, but each and every speaker, and the floor is all yours. Raise hands. You can type it in the chat box.
Okay, so we will take a couple of questions that passed before. Starting from the first question asked by you, how does a brain goes numb with emotions? What is the process that goes behind it? It is directed towards Mr. D'Souza.
I think he's not in the meeting.
Akanksha, I think he's traveling, so he'll join in a few moments. Maybe we can take his questions little later.
Okay. The next question is from Sian. When we are in stress or when we are nervous, why are we asked to choose sweets rather than chocolates?
I didn't get the question properly. I'm having a net problem. That's why you said that why are we asked to choose sweets?
And not chocolates rather than chocolates.
Chocolate is sweet.
No,
Unless they want to have.
I meant to say
Other
special.
chocolates, specifically chocolates. I think
Yes,
that's the
yes,
question.
Why chocolate per se is a stimulant because of the caffeine content. So I don't know whether when you say sweets, chocolate, many of our chocolates that we get in India, sweeter the better. So that means along with the caffeine, you also have the sugar. So it's a double whammy rather than single, so I'm not understanding the question. Why we asked to choose sweets? Sweets would be boiled sweets as in sweeties, or is it something that you suck on? I'm little not understanding about it, because according to me, I mean, either of the two, chocolates, like our regular chocolates that we have, Indian chocolates, they are in fact more sweeter than the foreign counterpart. If the Indian one you buy of the same brand and you buy a foreign one, the Indian one turns out to be more sweeter. Same for our aerated drinks, they're extremely sweet. So I don't know whether sugar or caffeine, what do you want to deal with? Because both will stimulate you, both will make you feel good and great, both will make you feel happy. And in fact, you'll probably want to prance from one mountain to the next, like the ads do. And that kind of energy, what I'm trying to depict is that kind of energy. What these ads, because that's back of our mind, these ads are very embedded in our brain. Somewhere we keep storing them and recalling them totally, and it's a good thing. And but we don't realize that after the sugar effect has gone, about 2 hours later, what should we do? Should we go back to the sweet, or should we solve the problem that we are facing? So in the first place, solve the problem, no? problem is not going anywhere. Problem has to be tackled anyway. You may want to pretend it's not there, but it is there facing you. And if you don't tackle it in whatever way you can, I mean, whatever rational. Now, many people say you were wrong at the time of tackling it. But in retrospect, when the same person will say, no, Noah, that time you took a good decision. So you don't know the decision that you're taking right now is right or wrong. So I feel based on your experience, based on your level of reasoning, you take a decision and stick by it. And if it turns out to be wrong, there's no harm in going back and asking for forgiveness for it. I mean, that will make you even stronger person. I mean, it's humbling in a way. You don't have to be whole. I mean, that's where the ego play comes in, and it's a personality trait. So I'm just thinking ki instead of taking a crutch along with you, there are many people who carry biscuit packets in their bag. And when they have nothing to do, they'll open the biscuit packet and just keep munching. Now, what is it? What is it emotionally? I asked Dr. Sawant, okay, what is it that makes them do these habits? I mean, is it a learned habit? According to me, I watch other people doing the same thing. So then why don't I carry something? You know, I'll not get food to eat at a particular place. So I might as well arm myself with sweets, chocolates, some chuda. And there are some ladies that perpetually carry this in their bag. It's like when they walk out of the house, only they walk out like an army, you know, like a backpack filled with all their rations, you know. And then there is something called peer pressure. This is what I have seen. When friends get together, friends are getting together. I understand. Nice, very nice. But why choose a eating place only? And then that is something that foxes me. Are these friends eating friends, like how you have soccer friends, you have card friends, so you have eating friends. So this is something that is literally, so you must identify. I'm asking each one of you to identify. If your friend says, no, that burger joint is open, new, let's go try it. So the friend doesn't require your company. The friend doesn't want to talk to you. The friend wants to try the burger. So she's merely asking you, accompany me so I don't feel alone. I don't feel shy eating the burger alone. So the person who's across feels, see, so nice. Everywhere she goes, she takes me and goes. But she is taking you merely like a chaperone. That if you understand, quicker you understand, unless you get her habit and then get somebody else to tag along. So it's a vicious cycle. So one has to choose. They always say, you choose your friends. So if you want to choose eating friends, so be it. You will only meet, you'll not meet in a park or a garden. I have seen people dinner. I mean, I'm not, no offense to people who do that. The train is at 12 o'clock in the night. Dinner way past the dinner time. Way past the dinner time. We enter the train. I have personally sat in the train like this. And then you'll get the smells of puris and batata bhajis and, you know, all kinds of smells in the train. And then you wonder, ki ye log khana nahi khaye? Are 12 baje train hai. Wapas kha rahe? You know, it is something that I've yet to, probably when I grow older and wiser, I don't know, it takes another 30 years for me to realize habits of people. Why? In fact, people come to your house, they'll ask you, what are you cooking? What you're making? So are you coming to meet me or are you coming to eat my food? So I'm at Fox because each time I reason it out, I get defeated in my own reasoning. So I like to throw this question to Dr. Sawant and Dr. Avinash and tell me why, you know, maybe I'm wrong and I'm judging people too fast.
Not at all. I think you've picked up very, very salient observations about people, and that's so true. Like, you have train friends and card friends, and most of the times when friends meet, it's always about food and eating. But what we in psychology talk about here is really emotional eating or emotional hunger rather than physical hunger. So physical hunger, we know you're hungry. That when you're hungry, you'll eat whatever is in front of you. But emotional hunger is when you crave for something specific, right? And you have to eat it there and then. So when food becomes a replacement for some other void that you are experiencing in life, food becomes, when you start equating food with either stability or with comfort or with some kind of security, that is when this starts. And once it starts, in a lot of ways, it's also a form of addiction, right? So we can have a long discussion on that.
Yeah. No,
On
because
that
this is
note-
something that I have seen among my family members, among people. I mean, when we go out to meet people, we are meeting people. Food should be secondary. In a kitty party, I've seen. In fact, I spoke to a lady who was a relative of mine. I said, "You attend kitty parties? What do you all do?" She said, "First, we have the farsan. Huh? After farsan," I said, "What do you all do?" "Na farsan khate hai na. Farsan ke baad, then the cocktail snacks comes out." I said, "Farsan ka matlab kya hai fir? Aur cocktail snacks ka matlab farsan mane chuda na." Say puri, all these charts and all. Then the mocktails, cocktails come out, and then the lunch comes out. I said, "Uske baad bhi lunch?" Yeah. Uske baad dessert bhi hota hai. I said, "You guys are on an eating binge, man." It's like, what do you do? I'm asking, what do you do? I not say, what do you eat? Then they say, no, we go to this one's house, then we meet at that one's house, and then we meet at this one's house. I said, all the time you're like taking food only. And she's saying, no, we also talk. I said, what do you all talk? Me, jo husband ke bare mein, then mother-in-law ke bare mein, and they are violent about it when they talk. They literally, in fact, if you hear some of them talk, they're ready to kill their mother-in-laws. That kind of violence, that kind of emotion comes out when they talk. So what is it that, I don't know how to help such people, because even words can be pretty violent when vicious, violent. I don't know how many more adjectives to add to it, but if words could kill, they probably kill everybody, that kind of thing. So that is the kind of emotions. And you sometimes look at these women and you say, "Ki, what is it that is hurting them so much? Why can't they learn to deal with it?" The problem is not going anywhere. The mother-in-law is not going to go anywhere. She's going to be right back at home when you're there. So what is this emotional, can you advise these young girls how to overcome this? I don't want anybody getting stuck into this kind of routine. I've seen enough of it in my life.
True. So enjoying a meal together with friends is absolutely okay, as long as it's part of the entire agenda and not becomes the center stage per se. And if you find yourself looking forward to some event that's happening only with the idea of what are you going to eat, then it's time to introspect and reflect, right? So identify what is the void, identify what is it that you're seeking, what is it that eating a certain thing makes you feel that is not, that you're not able to get from your life otherwise. Just a little bit of mindfulness, self introspection and self awareness will give you a lot of solutions here.
And on that note, we have a couple of questions in the chat box. We'll quickly look at them because I'm very sure they're eagerly waiting for the answers. So there's one question to Ms. Thar. What dietary modifications would you suggest in order to remain mentally peaceful and happy?
I would say dump the junk first. And junk is anything that is deep fried, has a high sugar content, has a high salt content, and contains one particular item called maida. Okay? Maida. If you know what is maida, English we call it refined flour. So all your bakery products, they taste very nice. You have a lot of actresses dancing and saying, "Oh no, eat this particular biscuit. I start my day with it." And if you actually look at the high fiber biscuit, there is no fiber in it. Okay, there's a hardly 4% fiber in it. Or so junk the maida. Maida comes in our naans, our rotis, maide ka roti. Then all our biscuits, noodle, pasta, pizza, pav. Bombay works on pav, please. We start it with a vada pav. Then mid-morning is usar pav. Then in the night is pav bhaji. So even chana pav and even bread bhajia. You see it outside stations also. Bombay runs on pav. But does pav really help you? No. It only causes acidity in many people. And people don't know why their faces are bloated and why their fingers are bloated and why their feet are bloated. Just cut down on the maida and then you'll know why it's bloated. That's it. That's the dietary change.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The next question is, what's the best possible way to define mental trauma? What are the symptoms of the same? Yashodhara asks this question.
This is actually not related to what we are talking about today, which is emotions and emotional regulation. Trauma is a whole different topic, and I can spend an entire day talking about it. But I'll just try and respond in one sentence, give a very simplistic answer. Anything that leaves a very deep impact on you, any experience which is adverse and unpleasant and leaves a very, very deep impact on you, so much that it impacts the way you think, the way you respond to situations, and affects the core beliefs that you have about yourself, about the world, and about other people, can be called as a traumatic experience. I won't get too much into details because we would deviate from the topic at hand today. I hope that's okay.
That's totally like you summarized the trauma in a very simple words. Thank you so much. We'll go ahead with Amisha. Amisha, go ahead with your question.
So there's one question on YouTube chat, which is, what about the effects of regular caffeine drinking on the brain's reward system?
What is the effect of regular caffeine drinking? Depends how regular and in what quantity. There are people who have cutting coffees and cutting chais every 1 hour. So is that called regular? Or the regular is, I have my regular 1 cup of tea in the morning and that's it for the rest of the day. I don't have any more tea and coffee or cola drinks and things like that. So according to me, caffeine is not bad, but when you abuse it, that is when it starts showing its impact. So I would suggest, don't abuse any good thing also. Caffeine helps you in the morning. It gives you that little kick to start, stimulator. It is considered as a stimulating beverage, stimulating item. But there are people who will have have you seen those Coca-Cola drinks in the malls? 1 liter bada bottle. It doesn't even fit in my refrigerator. I don't know whether it's 1 liter or 1.5 or 2 liters. I've seen kids putting it to their mouth, and walking around the mall, and they are drinking it. And next time, go to what do you call this? I know movies have already started, but you see the popcorn thing. So what are you doing? You're taking a caffeine loaded drink and you are taking a salt loaded easy carb. So what a deadly combination. You see, that's the best combination, Pepsi and popcorn. The popcorn mein kitna salt hai to dekho. Salt affects the blood pressure. It affects the your insulin hormone. The sugar affects the insulin hormone, and you just wonder why at the end of it you're feeling so stuffed by just eating popcorn and your stomach is full. And best part is, for this food they charge some 200 rupees for a popcorn. I don't know whether it's 300 now, but I have bought it before pandemic for 200 rupees. I don't know whether I bought the biggest size also. And then one glass of drink, I think it's about a liter. It's a glass of, not a bottle, that would cost you somewhere around 150 rupees. And green leafy vegetables, when you go in the market, one entire bunch of green leafy vegetable costs 30 rupees and you will say it's so expensive. Okay. So I don't know what to say to people who say caffeine is good. I feel, yes, you can have it. Okay. But as doctor said, mindful. You be sure that it is not causing you any kind of acidity and GI disturbances. If it does, then it is harming you more than helping you.
That answers the questions on YouTube. Before we take the questions from the chat, Mahi, you had a hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you. So my question is, so before like exams especially, I really crave for good food like one night before exams. and now listening to discussion, I know it's like more harmful. So how to cut that craving of that good food or the comfort food, basically?
The best way to cut that craving is first is to reduce the quantity and supplement it with a better quality food. I'm not saying avoid it, because your mind may not accept it immediately. Okay. But if it is causing you distress after consuming it, remember it's harming you. If it's going to make you sleepy, after, instead you want to be awake and alert to study, right? And after you eat that, you say, no, now let me go to sleep. I'll get up tomorrow morning and study. So, and if your intention was to study, I'm not saying burn the midnight oil, but you should be comfortable eating it and don't eat it in excess, and try to fill it with healthier alternatives. I'll give you a simple example. A sandwich, if you like a sandwich, okay, in that sandwich, just don't put butter in it and eat it. Okay. You can add all the mixed vegetables that you can. Okay. All the sabjis, whatever your mother probably wouldn't able to get down your throat, put it in that sandwich. Okay. And make a cutlet or put it in that sandwich. The idea is try to make healthier options. Try to reduce the processed foods, like a ready-made tomato sauce. Just check the sugar content, or a ready-made mayonnaise sauce. Now you get a range. My God, I've seen the range. The range is too good. You are at barbecue sauce, hoisin sauce. I can't even pronounce those names. So there are such a range of sauces, burger sauces. So if you're going to look at all the sauces and then put that in your sandwich, then your salt content is going to go up. So have the traditional whatever, and remember, the more you eat normal meals, at mealtime you don't feel hungry. You understand? You at mealtime you'll say, you look at the meal and say, no, I don't want to eat. But if somebody gave you a chicken burger or a vegetable burger or French fries, you say, yeah, I am hungry. So think of what you are consuming. So that automatically, if you are mindful, ki, yeah, I know this is not good for my health. This is not it, like cut it out. So if you develop that and promote it among your peers, see, what is this rubbish you're eating? You're going to feel sick after this. If you, the peer pressure, peer to peer transfer of information, then it would be nice.
Thank you, ma'am. With that, Prabha ma'am has her hand raised. Ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Avinash. I think he has joined back. Sir, are you there?
Yes.
Sir, I wanted to know that many a times it happens when we want to take a decision, we say that my brain agrees, but my heart doesn't agree. So is it so that my body is creating two contrast chemicals? So what is this exactly, that which chemicals are getting secreted at that time?
No, I think what happens is we are emotional beings. So there is a conflict between what the emotional aspects of our mind wants versus what the logical aspects of our mind wants. So like, to give you a very simple example, let's say when there's a breakup, the logical mind knows that this is all over and we have to move on in life. But the emotional mind tries to keep holding on there because you don't want to let go of what you've had. And you also want to probably, try and hope that things can get okay when it actually won't. So that is how our mind and our brain functions. Yes, there are chemicals which are released. There are positive and negative chemicals both released at the same time. But that is primarily what happens to, there are no two sets of chemicals, but it's a conflict between the logical thinking part of our brain and the emotional part.
Thank you, sir.
So we have a question in the chat box earlier. How does a brain goes numb with emotions? What is the process that goes behind it?
Well, there are a whole lot of processes that undergo going numb. What happens is that over time, your brain sort of gets habituated to certain emotions, so you don't sort of react to them. Over time, your brain doesn't release chemicals at all when certain emotions happen. And thirdly, it also happens that you begin to consider certain things as routine. So you wouldn't probably react to them at all from a brain perspective. And you sort of get acclimatized to your traumatic experiences, and therefore you go numb.
That's really insightful. Yamini, if that's right, the way you pronounce, go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to ask, like, even
if you have your food at your particular dinner time, like whether it's 8 or 9, as soon as it's midnight, like 12, 1, you start craving. And like it's a very strong craving. Like you want to have chips, you want to have something junk, not like, even though I know there is a chapati in the hot case, there is a proper food, but I won't want to eat that during midnight. I'm not talking about the routine eating time. It's like, because we all know we all sleep by 2, 3. It's like it's become a habit. It's in our routine. So at that point of time, you feel like you crave a lot. Even if you're studying or anything, you just crave junk. Like, why is it so, and how am I supposed to change that?
First of all, I wanted to answer that with one thing, is that all of us, after online classes are over, we go online watching videos on YouTube. And this, this exposure to this light has somewhere down the line changed our sleep pattern. So where we should be actually sleeping by, but 2-3 hours after we have eaten our last meal, we are still awake. And that sometimes goes against our system, and the hunger pangs come right back again. So at that time, you're not in a mood to eat dinner, because psychology, you finished your dinner. So then next what? I want something to make me happy. So that making me happy kind of thing, or making you go to the fridge, and whatever is the high sugar, high salt, deep fried, probably some mithai, some junk food is what we look at. So first, instead of changing the food habit, I would say try to change your sleep pattern. And because sleeping at 2 o'clock in the night and 3 o'clock in the morning is not normal. I mean, unless you are a call center employee that has to go to work in the night. I mean, that you do because you have a job. But for ordinary people like us, waking up till 2, 3 or 4 and regularly seeing TV, I'm not getting sleep. Try to probably change your sleep pattern, and then there will be a time mid-morning by about 1-2 o'clock you can't even stay awake. So somewhere down the line your biorhythms have got changed. So try to rectify that, and then automatically this craving will go away. Because I mean, that's just my giving. I prefer that to change the sleep pattern rather than try to alternative. What food can I eat? Why do you want another insulin spike in the middle of the night? That's what I ask for. So maybe a glass of milk with some haldi would do the trick. And by the way, glass of milk with some haldi is called turmeric latte. I was told that by a couple of students. Ma'am, what are you talking haldi milk? It's turmeric latte. I said, what is latte? No, it is sold in America or wherever, England, London. I said, that's a haldi doodh. She said, yeah, it's warm haldi doodh. And people are hooked onto it. I said, if they are calling our haldi doodh over there by the fancy name, and we have it right here in our own kitchens. So try that out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will move on to the questions in the chat box now. Gauri Gohil asks, if these physical problems occur too frequently because of emotions, can't it may lead to somatic disorder?
Is that question for me?
Yes.
So on an everyday basis, when you get when your emotions register themselves on your body, that is not a problem. But when there is an excessive, so for example, people who are constantly anxious, their bodies are constantly on a high alert, or people who are constantly experiencing certain fears and phobias, because of which their bodies are certain organs or certain systems in their bodies are more activated, that will and can lead to psychosomatic problems. But otherwise, if you're going through something, you experience something that disappoints you, or you experience a fearful situation and your body responds to that and it abates immediately, that's normal. That's not going to impact you in terms of any physical or somatic issues per se. So the point is, when emotions come and go naturally, when they flow through our minds, hearts and bodies, it's not a problem. It's when you get stuck in a certain emotional reaction or you are blocked in certain emotions is when psychosomatic or mental health issues can come up, which I think is the next question about how emotions can affect our mental health. Do you want me to take that question up as well? Yeah. So basically, in a whole lot of ways, emotions can impact our mental health. There are certain clinical disorders that are mood based, like we know depression, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and many other forms of mood disorders are basically disorders of mood or disorders of emotion. Other than that, we also have, for example, if we constantly, like I said, we are constantly fearful or anxious, we may manifest it as an anxiety disorder, as a phobia, as a panic disorder, right? So there are ways in which repeated patterns and deep rooted patterns of emotional responding can manifest as mental illnesses. In smaller ways, it can impact us because if we are blocking certain emotions, it impacts our relationships or the satisfaction and fulfillment that we get out of relationships, out of all areas of our life. So it can create a feeling of being unhappy, being miserable, being dissatisfied, or at times they can elevate our stress levels. If we are not able to appropriately identify and work through our emotions, they can impact our stress levels, and that in turn can impact our mental health. So yes, emotions and mental health are very, very closely related, sometimes manifesting as clinical disorders which require formal intervention from a psychological and psychiatric viewpoint, and sometimes it may not show up as a clinical disorder, but it may still impact your mental health.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There is another question for you, which says, we heard about certain chemicals in the body that are linked to us feeling happy and energetic or positive. Can you tell us about some activities which we can incorporate in our daily life that would help us activate these chemicals?
Okay, so you're talking about chemicals or emotions that lead to feelings of goodness and happiness and well being. That's very simple. Look at what are the things that give you joy. So, all of you, when you were younger, have had hobbies that you have truly enjoyed. Some of you may have been drawing and painting, some of you would have been dancing, some of you would have been very active in sports, and that has given you a lot of joy. Reconnect to those hobbies, reconnect to all those leisure activities that you may have now let go of, because right nowadays, I know your generation and maybe it's all of us, the moment there is free time, we just go on some or the other form of digital entertainment, right? So we have lost touch with all the various activities that gave us joy. These are the best ways to connect, recharge yourself, and help you to feel reconnected to those feelings. The other thing is connect to people who are close to you, all your loved ones, all the significant others in your life. Have conversations, make connections, be emotionally connected to your family members, your siblings, your friends, anybody with whom you feel closely connected. That will help you to feel good and feel supported. And from time to time, check in about what your goals in life are, and are you working towards those goals. Because a lot of your feeling of well-being comes from knowing and feeling that you're doing what you want to do in life, or you're working towards some goal or some dream or some passion. So from time to time, doing that check-in, and we all do get distracted. Everyday life can throw up many things which take us away from what we really want to do. That's normal and that's fine. But from time to time, keep checking in and keep bringing yourself back on your focus. All these simple things will help you to be connected to those feel good emotions or feel good chemicals, so to speak.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There's a question that I would like to pose for Dr. D'Souza. When you were talking about how sometimes when we don't necessarily use a few chemicals, frequently it becomes a pattern of behaving in a certain way, which leads to a different chain of reactions in the chemical settings. What if when we go in therapies and we resolve some issues that we have with therapy, can chemical changes also occur in the brain in order to change a person's reaction or the ability to feel an emotion? I think Dr. Avinash isn't here.
I think he's no longer there.
We will move on to the next question from the chat box then. Krishna asks, my question is to Samindra ma'am. Can excessively using social media can influence our emotions? What are the long-term impacts and our views of self?
So social media is good. Social media is great because it's such a wonderful way of not just being connected with your friends, but also of networking, getting new business, putting your talent out there. There are many, many positives about social media. The problem is in your question itself, Prashita, when you say excessively using. So, as Dr. Ratnaraja already said about caffeine, the moment you abuse it is when it becomes a problem. The same applies to social media. Anything in moderation is good. It helps us to get the best out of that particular resource that's available to use. But when you're excessively onto it, it's either because you're trying to look at getting some validation from the virtual life, which you're not getting in your real life, or which you're not brave enough to seek in your real life, right? So, yes, it influences your emotions because you start thriving on the number of likes and the responses you get to your posts. You look at what other people are posting, and we all know that what we post on Insta. So you click 20 pictures and you post one good picture, right? The remaining 19 pictures may be crappy, but the rest of the world doesn't see it. That's what social media is all about. You only put out there the best, which may be a small percent of your life. There is a lot of other things that is happening in everybody's life which is not put out there. But if we start evaluating ourselves, we start judging ourselves, and we start thinking, oh, my life is so boring. Somebody is having such a wonderful holiday and posting pictures. Somebody is going to all these fancy restaurants and posting food pictures. Somebody is posting all these fabulous looking pictures of themselves. Where am I? So that will, of course, start making you feel not good about yourself, unhappy, miserable, and all kinds of unpleasant emotions. So, yes, if you're going to be excessively using social media, it can negatively impact your self esteem and your mood because you negatively compare yourself to others. But if you use it in moderation, in healthy ways, it's a good way to be connected and to know what's happening in the world around us.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
It is a last question for this session by Arya Dikshit. She's asking, is listening to music or watching something before sleeping be a reason for disruptive sleep or the opposite?
Listening to music need not be disruptive, especially if you're listening to music that is soothing, calming. If you listen to any kind of classical or semi classical music, and I'm not necessarily talking about Indian classical or Hindustani classical, but even Western class, anything that has rhythm can be soothing, calming, and will help, in fact, to be able to sleep well and sleep deeply. Watching is something to be avoided just before you go to sleep. One of the reasons Dr. Ratnaraja already mentioned, because the constantly being on screen activates certain brain centers that are not conducive for relaxing and sleeping. That's number one. Number two, a lot of the content that you young people are watching nowadays is so dark and so gory and so creepy, right? That it creates a lot of unpleasant emotions even when you're watching it. And this is something I always tell all my young clients: watch something happy, watch something romantic, watch something comic from time to time rather than constantly watching all these dark series, right? So that is going to affect, release certain unhappy neurochemicals that's going to impact how you sleep. So definitely watching is not advisable, especially late into the night. You watch something for some time, but don't immediately go to bed. Then take a 10-15 minute break, have a glass of water, look around, chat to a family member, and chat, I mean face to face, not on your screens, and then go to sleep. That will help. But if you watch something and then immediately try to sleep, it's going to be harder for you to fall asleep.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Right here, we wrap up the question and answer session for today's panel discussion. Moving on with the agenda, Anushri, take over.
Thank you. Thank thank you all for such an insightful and delightful session. We are coming to the end of this beautiful panel discussion. Over to you, Krishna.
Thank you so much, Anushri. As we reach the end of this event, on the behalf of everyone present here, I would like to thank our guest, Dr. Avinash D'Souza, for giving us an insight on how relationship between the chemical in our brain and environment, along with being specific with our gender, affects us. Dr. Ratnaraja Krishna Thar for giving us the information on our comfort food and how much they mean to us and our moods. Ms. Samindra Sawant for giving us the cherry on top by talking about the processing our emotions and turning them into useful information. Once again, it warms our hearts to see you spend your precious time with us. I would like to give a big thank you to the Department of Psychology and Chemistry from Sophia College for putting this together and having this engaging discussion with such amazing speakers. And lastly, no event can happen without the provision of a vast network of people. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Psych Sanctum for weaving this event together with the students of Psychology and Chemistry Department. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to see you and interact with you. Looking forward for more such events. And with this, we bid you a warm goodbye.
Please request everyone to fill the feedback form.
Before everyone leaves the platform, there is a link posted in the chat for the feedback. Please do fill the form so that we can make the event much more better than what we have already. Also, the certificates for the participation will be mailed to you within the 15 days. Thank you so much for attending such a
I had a question. Is it possible to ask if it's okay with everyone? Like,
Okay, last question.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know, there are these Indian shows where they just don't, they mistreat people. So like, you want to stand up for those kind of people, but you can't. So there is this inner feeling is stuck with you. Like, they drag on the episodes and serials for a week, and then there is this inner urge to help them out, like psychologically or subconsciously. So do you become violent or aggressive in like real life?
That question for Dr. Sawant?
Yes.
I don't think she's in the meeting anymore.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
We can
Thank
probably
you.
discuss it in class sometime with your teachers.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Yamini.
Please
Thank
make
you.
sure you fill in the feedback form to ensure that you get your certificates.
The feedback form is going to work as your attendance also. So in case that you want your certificates to be delivered, it is mandatory for you to prove your attendance that you attended it. So kindly do that. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, students.
It's a pleasure having all of you here.
Don't forget to fill your feedback forms.
Oh, good.
Stop streaming, please.